to do something that has some sustainability, we have to get answers to a lot of questions that don't exist yet. And we have to have other infrastructure in place, in my opinion, in order to make this a viable enterprise. So let me start with communications, because that's really the place where I feel like I have been able to make some small contributions. Some of you will be aware of something called the Consultative Committee on Space Data Systems. You'll know that they have been responsible for the development of standards for space communication. Way back in 1998, several of my colleagues at JPL and I got together just after the Pathfinder landed successfully on Mars. And all of you who are keeping track of this know that it was some 20 years before the successful landing of the Viking. So some years went by when many things didn't succeed. So when the Pathfinder arrived, my colleagues and I started thinking about how we were communicating with that system that was a surface to Mars back to Earth by way of the Deep Space Network. And we got to thinking, what would happen if we had an interplanetary backbone network to support manned and robotic space exploration? And we even started out thinking, well, the internet works on Earth, surely it would work on Mars, and probably it would. However, we started doing the math for interplanetary distances and very quickly came to the conclusion that the speed of light was too slow. The TCP protocol, for example, relies on a very simple flow control scheme. It was designed to work pretty well when the latencies between the 2 points that are communicating is on the order of a few hundred milliseconds. But if it's 20 minutes one way and 40 minutes round trip time, the flow control doesn't work very well, as you can imagine. All it basically says, if the guy that's receiving says stop, I run out of room. And if the other guy hears that, within a few hundred milliseconds and stops, then the few packets that were in transit could be buffered and you're okay. But if it takes 20 minutes before you even hear the request to stop and all that traffic has shown up, then things don't work so well. There was another problem that came up too. Planetary rotation is there, and we don't know how to stop that. And so if you're talking to something on the surface and the planet's rotating, or if you're talking to a satellite that's in orbit that disappears behind the planet, you can't talk to it. TCP/IP was not designed for that kind of disruptive variable delay environment. So we started working on a new suite of protocols around 1998. We went through several iterations of that design, and around 2004, when the two rovers landed in January, as you will recall, we ran into a problem with the direct Earth path from the surface of Mars back to the Deep Space Network, and recovered from the difficulties we had. Remember, that data rate was only 28.5 kilobits a second, which the scientists were fairly unhappy about. When the radios showed signs of overheating, and I guess there may have been some other problems as well, after thinking through reducing the duty cycle to prevent overheating from damaging anything, the next alternative was we had X-band radios on the rovers, which couldn't get all the way back to Earth, but they could get up to the orbiters, which had been sent ahead of time in order to map the surface of Mars. So the orbiters and the rovers were reprogrammed to store data in the rovers until the orbiters got overhead, and data was transmitted up using the CFDP protocols, which was an early version of what we now call the bundle protocol. Data was held in the orbiter until it got to the right place in its orbit to transmit data back to the Deep Space Network. So virtually all the data that's come back from the rovers and the science laboratory have been returned by way of a store and forward network. Well, that's packet switching, that's what the internet is, and that's what the bundle protocol does. At this point, we have the current versions of the bundle protocol running on the International Space Station. We are testing those protocols in a variety of different configurations. We've done some real-time tests as well. I mean, this is the store and forward system, when you have high latency, is closer to email than anything else. I mean, you know all the wonderful science fiction movies that you see where somebody's in trouble in orbit around Saturn and says, Houston, we have a problem, and there ensues a real-time communication between them. Of course, that makes for better drama. But if you did it right way, of course, the movie would take an extra 30 days and everybody would fall asleep. So this is called sort of professional license, literary license. On the other hand, we have been able to test the bundle protocols both in high latency environments and also in low latency real-time environments. So we have tested the protocols from the International Space Station, which is a relatively low latency environment down to Earth. There have been some real-time experiments controlling rovers from the International Space Station using the new bundle protocols. And that has worked out reasonably well. And then more recently, some tests were done using laser communications to the moon and back at 600 megabits a second. And so this is the next big exciting possibility, is that we can use the bundle protocols at those much higher data rates in order to deliver substantially more data between Mars and Earth by way of the relays. So the comments about the CubeSats, for example, are quite important and relevant. We are in the middle of doing some plans for CubeSat tests of the bundle protocols so that we can try these out in a fairly small-scale, low-cost framework. And so I'm persuaded that the communication requirements for Mars-based networking are largely in hand. There's still some work to be done on the security side. Nobody wants to have a headline saying 15-year-old takes over MarsNet, so we're very concerned to make sure that this is a well-secured system. The second thing that is trickier than it is for terrestrial networks is network management. And if you think just for a moment about an interplanetary scale system, one where it's not always assured that a packet that you transmit is actually going to make it through multiple hops to get to the destination, real-time control is not realistic. When you send a ping message in the internet, you have reasonable expectation that either it will get there and you'll get a response or it will have gotten lost, but there isn't any uncertainty after a certain amount of time has elapsed. In the case of the interplanetary backbone, there's much more uncertainty about how long it will take for any packet to get to its final destination, especially if it has to go through a series of hops. Those hops may be delayed by celestial motion and connectivity and everything else. So network management turns out to be a really interesting, almost autonomous kind of challenge, where you have to be able to send a bunch of instructions to some distant place and have it interpret those instructions and take actions without any further interaction. So nonetheless, in spite of all that, I think that we have a reasonable chance of introducing a good communications environment for further exploration of Mars. The second thing which has occurred to me, and it's probably occurred to you, and that's why I hope that you'll engage in some discussion after I finish my preliminary remarks, is precision landing and being able to pinpoint and land things where we want them to go. The reason I think that's so important is that if we're going to do any kind of supply to a landing party, we're going to need to be able to put things down very close to wherever it is we need them to go. We can't have too much variation in landing site, short of being careful about not landing on top of the astronauts who are over there on the surface, because they may not be able to go very far in order to get access to whatever it is that we delivered. So that suggests to me that before we get too ambitious, we should be demonstrating our ability to land payload at very precise locations on the surface. This also suggests to me that as we start thinking more and more about sustainability, that we're going to want to ask ourselves, well, what else can we do ahead of time in order to prepare ourselves for a longer stay, even if it's only a question of months on Mars before we could return a landed party. That's a long time to sustain a group of astronauts. And so all of you know these things, the in-situ fuel production, for example, the ability to produce extra oxygen by finding water and cracking it, possibly using solar power for that purpose. There are a variety of things along those lines. I guess also, remembering the famous movie that we all enjoyed, And that's whether or not we can actually raise any food and what we need to do that. I would guess that it might not be so easy to deliver enough food for a group of astronauts for a period of 9 months or more. And if we did want to do that, I'd go back to the precision location and preservation of that material. So figuring out whether we're capable of doing anything local in the way of, let me call it farming, is another big issue. The point that was made in the earlier panel about standards, I'd like to reinforce that for several reasons. The first one, clearly, is that if we're going to make this a cooperative and collaborative effort, which I believe it must be, then things have to work. Well, that's true for communications, it's true for mechanical interfaces and things like that. We have to be able to take advantage of the capabilities of all the spacefaring nations, some to do launch, some to do interfacing and building of assets, some to be able to land, for example, habitats and so on, and have everything fit together. And so agreement on standards, I think, is going to be a critical part of the successful exploration of Mars, especially for any lengthy attempt to stay there. So my question for you, as people who've been thinking very hard about this for longer than I have, is what else should we be asking to put on the agenda of things that we want to know in order to prepare ourselves for successful missions? There was mentioned the virtual reality, the idea of allowing people to explore Mars virtually. I'm going to suggest that there is the flip side of that, which is getting enough information in order to successfully emulate or model or simulate Mars conditions well enough so that we can test our ideas for building habitats and infrastructure that will support these missions. And so that suggests that we have to have more knowledge than we already have today. I have to admit to you, I was driving over here this morning. It's a beautiful spring day. And I was thinking, why would anybody want to go to Mars when the weather is kind of closer to Antarctica than it is here? On the other hand, that planet has been in our firmament for a very long time, and it's been an attractor for people for literally thousands of years. And so I can still see it, although on a pretty spring day like this, sometimes I think wandering around in an atmosphere like Antarctica might not be your best choice. So let me stop with this beginning remarks and ask whether you would like to engage in a discussion about things that we should know and things that we should do and to check off on our agenda in order to have a successful series of missions and a sustainable location on Mars. Now, if nobody has any questions or doesn't want to raise any issues, we can all go to sleep, or you can start the next session earlier. But I'm going to challenge you to engage. Now, I need to warn you that I'm hearing impaired, and I didn't come to speak and not listen.
Okay.
So I'm going to move over to the center stage where there's supposed to be some speakers that provide good quality sound, because normally on the stage you can't hear a damn thing because the speakers are all aimed at you. If that doesn't work for me, I'm going to jump off the stage and not kill myself. I'm just going to go off the stage and then go back and forth to the microphones in order to lip read if I have to. And so if that is necessary, I'm going to ask the house lights to come up so I can actually see it. So let's see whether anyone has any comments to make about my remarks or some of the other things you've heard so far.